Marcus Wellington III had everything money could buy: a penthouse overlooking Central Park, a collection of vintage cars, and a business empire worth $4.2 billion. Yet on this crisp Tuesday morning, he looked nothing like the man whose face graced the covers of Forbes and Fortune. Dressed in worn jeans, a faded flannel shirt, and scuffed work boots, Marcus had deliberately transformed himself into someone invisible to the world that usually bent to his every whim. His salt and pepper hair was hidden beneath a weathered baseball cap, and he'd grown out his beard for 3 weeks specifically for this purpose. He'd been planning this experiment for months, inspired by a conversation with his late father, who'd always warned him that wealth could blind a person to reality. The idea had crystallized after attending a charity gala where everyone praised his generosity, while treating the serving staff like furniture. Marcus wanted to understand what life looked like from the other side, not as a billionaire, but as an ordinary person, perhaps even someone struggling. He'd left his penthouse at dawn, taking the subway for the first time in 15 years, and now stood outside Bernie's Diner, a modest establishment in Queens he'd chosen specifically because no one there would recognize him. Through the window, he could see vinyl booths, a long counter with red stools, and waitstaff moving efficiently through the breakfast crowd. This was authentic America, the kind of place his corporate meetings and charity galas had insulated him from for decades. Taking a deep breath, Marcus pushed through the door, triggering a cheerful bell. The aroma of coffee, bacon, and toast enveloped him immediately. A few patrons glanced up briefly before returning to their meals and conversations. No one gave him a second look, no one rushed to accommodate him, and no one treated him with the deference he'd grown accustomed to. It was exactly what he'd hoped for, yet the anonymity felt strangely unsettling. For the first time in years, Marcus Wellington was just another customer, and he was about to discover that this ordinary diner would teach him an extraordinary lesson about humanity, dignity, and the value of truly seeing the people around him. Bernie's Diner had stood on this corner for 43 years, a testament to simple food done right and genuine hospitality. The black and white checkered floor showed its age, and the red vinyl booths had been repaired more times than anyone could count, but there was a warmth to the place that no designer restaurant could replicate. Photographs lined the walls, snapshots of the neighborhood's history, regular customers celebrating birthdays, Little League teams Bernie had sponsored over the decades. The laminated menus were worn at the edges, offering classic American fare at prices that hadn't changed much in 5 years, a point of pride for Bernie Kowalski, the third-generation owner who'd inherited both the diner and his grandfather's commitment to serving the community. Marcus slid into a booth near the window, the vinyl creaking beneath him. From this vantage point, he could observe the entire operation. Behind the counter, a cook worked the griddle with practiced efficiency, calling out orders in restaurant shorthand. 2 waitresses moved through the space with the synchronized grace of people who'd worked together for years, refilling coffee cups and delivering plates without breaking stride. But it was the young black waiter who caught Marcus's attention, a man in his mid-20s, tall and lean, with an easy smile and attentive eyes that seemed to notice everything. His name tag read James, and he moved through the diner with a quiet professionalism that reminded Marcus of the best executives in his company, people who made difficult work look effortless. The morning rush was in full swing. Construction workers occupied the counter, their conversations punctuated by laughter and good-natured ribbing. In another booth, an elderly couple shared a newspaper and a pot of tea, their comfortable silence speaking to decades of companionship. A single mother tried to manage twin toddlers while attempting to drink her coffee, and James appeared at her table without being summoned, producing crayons and paper placemats to occupy the children. The woman's grateful smile seemed to energize him as he moved on to his next table. Marcus watched this small act of kindness with growing interest. There was no manager watching, no tip large enough to warrant such attention, just a young man who saw someone struggling and responded with grace. As Marcus observed the diner's ecosystem, he realized how much he'd forgotten about places like this, community hubs where people weren't customers but neighbors, where service was personal rather than transactional. His restaurants, the ones his investment portfolio included, operated with clinical efficiency, maximizing table turnover and profit margins. But they'd lost something vital in the process, something Bernie's diner had retained. Here, the 70-year-old man at the counter was greeted by name, his usual order prepared without him having to ask. The teenagers in the corner booth weren't rushed despite nursing their sodas for an hour, their textbooks spread across the table as they studied together. This was what his father had meant about staying connected to reality, about understanding that wealth was meant to serve communities like this, not replace them. Marcus found himself feeling both humbled and strangely hopeful as James finally approached his booth, order pad in hand, ready to take the disguised billionaire's order. "Good morning, sir. What can I get for you today?" James's voice was warm and professional, his posture attentive without being obsequious. Up close, Marcus noticed details he'd missed from across the room. The careful press of James's uniform despite its obvious age, the slight calluses on his hands suggesting work beyond waiting tables, and most strikingly, an intelligence in his eyes that seemed to assess and understand more than most people revealed in casual encounters. There was no judgment in his gaze as he looked at Marcus's shabby clothes, no disdain or dismissiveness that Marcus had half expected to encounter as part of this experiment. Instead, James offered the same respectful attention he'd given to every other customer, treating the apparent working-class man before him with dignity. Marcus cleared his throat, suddenly aware of how long it had been since he'd ordered his own meal in a place like this. "I'll have a cheeseburger, medium well, with fries and a Coke," he said, choosing something simple and iconic. James nodded, making a note on his pad. "Excellent choice. Bernie makes the best burgers in Queens, grinds the beef fresh every morning. Any preferences on the cheese?" Marcus shook his head. "Surprise me?" A smile flickered across James's face. "American cheese it is. Classic never goes wrong. I'll have that right out for you." As James turned to leave, Marcus found himself adding, "It's nice here. You've been working here long." It was a test of sorts, wanting to see how James would respond to personal inquiry from a stranger. James paused, and something in his expression suggested he recognized the question as more than small talk. "About 2 years now, on and off between classes. Bernie's a good man to work for, treats his staff like family. Not every place does that." There was no bitterness in his tone, just matter-of-fact observation. "You're in school?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious now. "Columbia. Graduate program in social work. I'm specializing in economic mobility and community development." The answer surprised Marcus, though he tried not to show it. Here was someone pursuing graduate studies at one of the nation's top universities while working at a diner, someone studying the very systems of wealth and poverty that Marcus's business decisions influenced daily, though James had no idea who he was talking to. "That's impressive," Marcus said sincerely. "What drew you to that field?" James leaned against the booth slightly, and Marcus got the sense that he didn't often get asked about his studies at work. "I grew up in the Bronx, watched my neighborhood get picked apart by predatory lending, watched families lose everything when jobs disappeared. My mom worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat after my dad died. I figured if I understood the systems that keep people trapped in poverty, maybe I could help change them." The passion in his voice was unmistakable, as was the personal pain that fueled it. Marcus felt a pang of guilt, knowing that men like him, billionaires making decisions in boardrooms, were often the architects of the very systems James was studying to dismantle. Before Marcus could respond, another customer signaled for James's attention. "I should get your order in. But I appreciate you asking, sir. Not many people take the time." With that, James moved away, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts. The billionaire stared out the window at the busy street, watching people hurry to work, wondering how many of them were struggling like James's mother had, how many were one emergency away from financial catastrophe. His own path to wealth had been smoothed by inherited advantages, elite schools, family connections, startup capital from his father's fortune. James was building his future with nothing but determination, intelligence, and apparently exhausting work hours. The contrast was stark and uncomfortable. As Marcus waited for his burger, he began to understand that this experiment might reveal more about his own blind spots than he'd anticipated. The question was whether he'd have the courage to act on what he learned. 20 minutes later, James returned with a tray bearing Marcus's lunch. The burger looked magnificent, a thick patty topped with melted American cheese, crisp lettuce, ripe tomato, and pickles on a toasted brioche bun. The fries were golden and perfectly salted, steam rising from them in the diner's warm air. "Here you go, sir. Hope you enjoy it." James set down the plate, then the Coke in its condensation-beaded glass, and finally, the check face down on the table. But as he did so, Marcus noticed something unusual. James's hand lingered on the check for just a moment, and his eyes met Marcus's with an intensity that seemed to communicate something unspoken. Then he was gone again, moving to another table, leaving Marcus staring at the check with sudden curiosity. Marcus picked up his burger first, taking a bite. It was, as promised, exceptional. The beef was flavorful and juicy, clearly fresh ground, the vegetables crisp, the bun perfectly toasted. It was better than burgers he'd paid $50 for at trendy restaurants, and here it cost $8.95. He savored it slowly, watching the diner's life continue around him, but his attention kept returning to the check lying face down beside his plate. Finally, unable to resist his curiosity any longer, Marcus flipped it over. The total was written clearly at the bottom, $12.47 with tax. But above it, in neat handwriting, was a message that made his heart stop. "I know who you are, Mr. Wellington. Please don't leave when you finish. I need to talk to you. It's urgent. James." The burger suddenly tasted like cardboard in Marcus's mouth. His disguise had been penetrated. But how? He'd been so careful, had transformed himself so thoroughly. Marcus scanned the diner nervously, wondering if others had recognized him, but everyone else seemed focused on their own meals and conversations. His mind raced through possibilities. Had James recognized him from news coverage? Had someone tipped him off? And what could be so urgent that a waiter would risk his job by approaching a billionaire customer this way? Marcus's first instinct was to leave immediately, to escape before the situation became more complicated. But something stopped him. Perhaps it was the memory of James's passionate words about helping his community, or the dignity with which he'd treated Marcus before knowing his identity. Marcus ate slowly, mechanically, his mind churning. He watched James work, trying to detect any change in his demeanor, any sign that he'd told others about the billionaire in booth 7. But James continued his duties with the same professionalism as before, refilling coffee cups, delivering orders, chatting briefly with regular customers. If anything, he seemed to be deliberately avoiding looking in Marcus's direction, giving him space to process the revelation. The check had said urgent. But urgent how? Was James in trouble? Did he need money? Was this some kind of shakedown? Marcus's years in business had made him cautious about unexpected approaches, especially from people who knew his net worth. Yet something about James's earlier conversation suggested this wasn't about opportunistic greed. 45 minutes passed. The lunch rush was winding down, and the diner was half empty now. Marcus had long since finished his meal, nursing his Coke as he debated his next move. He could leave $20 on the table and walk out. He owed this young man nothing, after all. But his father's voice echoed in his memory. "The measure of a man isn't how he treats his equals, Marcus, but how he treats those who can do nothing for him." Marcus had come to this diner seeking authenticity, seeking to understand the lives of ordinary people. Now one of those people was asking for his attention, and walking away would make his entire experiment a hollow exercise. Taking a deep breath, Marcus caught James's eye and gave a small nod. The relief that flashed across the young man's face was unmistakable. Whatever was coming next, Marcus had committed himself to hearing it. He only hoped he wouldn't regret the decision. When the last of the lunch crowd had departed and Bernie had stepped out for his afternoon supply run, James approached Marcus's booth with 2 fresh cups of coffee. "Thank you for staying, Mr. Wellington. I promise this won't take long, and I'm not after money." He slid into the booth across from Marcus, setting down both coffees, his hands trembling slightly with nerves. Up close, Marcus could see the exhaustion in James's eyes, the kind of bone-deep weariness that came from carrying too much weight for too long. "How did you recognize me?" Marcus asked, his curiosity genuine. James smiled faintly. Your watch. You forgot to take it off. It's a Patek Philippe Nautilus. My father had one. He was an investment banker before he got sick. I recognized it the moment you walked in. Marcus glanced down at his wrist, cursing his oversight. The watch had been his father's, worn so constantly that he'd forgotten it was there. It was worth more than most people in this neighborhood earned in a year. Your father was a banker? Marcus said, encouraging James to continue. The young man nodded, cradling his coffee cup. Martin Howard. He worked for Lehman Brothers until 2008. When the crash came, he lost everything, his job, our savings, the house. The stress triggered a heart attack. He survived, but the medical bills finished what the crash started. We went from a brownstone in Park Slope to a one-bedroom in the Bronx. He died 2 years later, broken and humiliated. He never recovered from the shame of not being able to provide for us. The grief in James's voice was still raw despite the years. Marcus felt a chill run through him. He'd been a major player in those years, had navigated the financial crisis skillfully, even profiting from it while families like James's had been destroyed. I'm sorry, Marcus said quietly. That must have been devastating. James looked directly at him, and there was steel beneath the sadness. It was. But it taught me something about systems, about how decisions made in boardrooms by people who never face consequences can destroy thousands of lives in communities they never visit. My father made mistakes. He over-leveraged, chased bonuses, participated in a corrupt system. But the men at the top, men like you, Mr. Wellington, they walked away rich while people like my dad paid the price. The accusation hung between them, uncomfortable and true. Marcus wanted to defend himself, to explain the complexity of global finance, but he'd come seeking truth, not comfort. Why did you want to talk to me, James? The young man pulled a folded document from his apron pocket, smoothing it on the table. This is my master's thesis proposal. It's about creating community investment cooperatives, local financial institutions that keep capital circulating in neighborhoods like this one, that invest in small businesses and affordable housing instead of extracting wealth. I've spent 2 years researching, modeling, and refining this. It could actually work, but I need startup capital. Not a handout, an investment. I've got 30 local businesses ready to participate, and I've modeled a sustainable return structure. Marcus picked up the document, scanning the executive summary. Even at a glance, he could see it was sophisticated work. Well-researched, carefully thought out, with realistic financial projections. This is impressive, he admitted. But there are traditional channels for this kind of funding. Why approach me in a diner? James leaned forward, intensity burning in his eyes. Because I've tried those channels for 6 months. Every bank, every venture fund, every social impact investor. They all say the same thing. Too risky and proven model, not enough collateral. But that's exactly what they said about microfinance before Muhammad Yunus proved it worked. Sometimes transformative ideas need someone willing to see beyond conventional wisdom. You have that reputation, Mr. Wellington. Your father did too. The mention of his father struck Marcus deeply. James had done his homework, had known about Marcus's presence in the diner, had prepared for this moment. It was audacious, risky, and showed remarkable strategic thinking. What exactly are you asking for? Marcus said, his business instincts engaging despite himself. $250,000 for a 2-year pilot program, James replied without hesitation. Structured as a loan with equity participation. If it succeeds, you'll make money and we'll have proven a model that can be replicated nationwide. If it fails, I'll personally guarantee repayment, even if it takes me 20 years. The young man's jaw was set with determination, and Marcus realized he was witnessing the same fire that had built his own empire decades earlier. The hunger to prove something, to change the world, to matter. Marcus set down the proposal, studying James carefully. You're gambling everything on this, your reputation, your financial future. Why? James's answer came without hesitation. Because communities like mine are dying, Mr. Wellington. Gentrification pushes out families who've lived here for generations. Predatory lenders trap people in debt. Good businesses close because they can't get fair loans. Someone has to try something different, and if not me, then who? I have the knowledge, the community trust, and the plan. I just need someone to believe in it enough to give it a chance. In that moment, Marcus saw something he'd rarely encountered in decades of business: pure, uncorrupted purpose. This wasn't about ego or greed. James wanted to fix something broken, to honor his father's memory by preventing other families from suffering the same fate. Marcus sat in silence, the proposal before him feeling heavier than its few pages should. Through the diner window, he watched the neighborhood go about its business. A mother pushing a stroller, teenagers laughing outside a bodega, an elderly man shuffling with his groceries. These were the people James wanted to help, the communities Marcus's world had forgotten or actively harmed. His mind drifted back to his father's final months, when the old man had grown reflective about his legacy. "I made us rich, Marcus," he'd said, "but I wonder if I made a difference. Money compounds, but so does impact, good or bad. The choices you make ripple outward. Make sure your ripples lift people up." At the time, Marcus had nodded dutifully, but he hadn't truly understood. Now, in this worn booth, he did. "You put me in an impossible position," Marcus said finally, his voice measured. "If I agree, I'm making a decision based on impulse rather than due diligence. That's not how sound investments are made. But if I dismiss you, I'm potentially ignoring exactly the kind of innovative thinking that created my fortune in the first place." James nodded, accepting the complexity. "I understand. I'm not asking for an answer today. I'm asking you to have your team review the proposal properly. Give me the same fair consideration you'd give any other pitch. That's all." It was a reasonable request, more reasonable than Marcus would have expected given the dramatic approach. Why not present this through proper channels? Why ambush me here? James's expression grew intense. "Because proper channels have gatekeepers who filter out people like me before we ever reach people like you. I've sent this proposal to 47 investors over 6 months. You know how many actually read it? 3. The rest saw my age, my zip code, my school loans, and decided I wasn't worth their time. The system is designed to keep capital concentrated at the top, to make innovation the privilege of the already privileged. I needed to bypass that system, and your disguise gave me the opening. I'm sorry for the deception, but I'm not sorry for trying." There was defiance in his voice, the righteous anger of someone fighting an unjust system. Marcus couldn't fault him. He'd broken plenty of rules building his empire. "What if I said no?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious. "What's your backup plan?" James's smile was sad but determined. "I keep working, keep saving, keep trying. It'll take me longer, maybe 5 years instead of 2, but I'll make this happen somehow. This community needs it too much for me to quit. My mom didn't work herself to exhaustion putting me through school, so I could give up at the first hurdle." The commitment was absolute, and Marcus recognized a younger version of himself in this determined young man. He remembered being 26, pitching his first major deal, being dismissed by men who thought his ideas were naive. He'd proven them wrong through sheer persistence, but it had taken years and taken a toll he still carried. Marcus made a decision, one that surprised him even as he spoke. "I'll review your proposal personally. Give me your contact information. If this is as solid as you say, we'll structure something fair." James's face transformed, hope blazing in his eyes. "Seriously? You're actually going to consider it?" Marcus held up a hand. "I'm going to evaluate it properly." "That's not a commitment. It's a promise of fair consideration, which is what you asked for. But I need you to understand something, James. If we move forward, it can't be because of guilt or sentiment. It has to be because the fundamentals are sound. I won't invest in failure, no matter how noble the intentions." It was important to set expectations, to be honest about what this could and couldn't be. "That's all I'm asking for," James said, pulling out his phone to exchange contact information. "A real chance. That's more than I've had anywhere else." As they swapped details, Marcus felt something shift inside him, a sense that his experiment had become something more meaningful than he'd anticipated. He'd come to this diner to understand how ordinary people lived, and instead he'd encountered someone extraordinary, someone who challenged his assumptions about merit, opportunity, and responsibility. "One more thing," Marcus said as James stood to leave. "Why did you trust that I wouldn't just leave? You took a big risk calling me out like that." James's answer was simple. "Because you came here disguised as a working man to understand us better. That told me you still had some of your father's decency left. I gambled you'd want to prove me right." The comment lingered after James returned to work, preparing for the dinner shift. Marcus sat alone with the proposal, reading it thoroughly now, finding himself impressed by the sophistication of the economic modeling and the depth of community research. This wasn't amateur hour. James had done serious work, identifying real problems with innovative solutions. The financial projections were conservative, but realistic, the risk management thoughtful, the social impact potentially transformative. Marcus pulled out his phone, texting his CFO. "Found something interesting. Need full analysis by end of week. Sending details shortly." As he photographed the proposal, Marcus realized this encounter had changed something fundamental in him. He'd been searching for authenticity, for connection to the real world. James had given him more than that, a challenge to do something meaningful with his privilege and power. Bernie returned from his supply run, nodding at Marcus as he passed. The diner owner had no idea his booth had hosted a conversation that might reshape local economic development. That anonymity felt appropriate somehow. Real change often began in quiet moments, not grand gestures. Marcus left $60 on the table for a $12 meal, not as charity, but as acknowledgement of value received. As he stood to leave, James caught his eye from across the diner. No words were exchanged, just a nod of mutual respect. Marcus stepped out into the Queen's afternoon, his disguise intact but his perspective fundamentally altered. He'd come seeking to understand struggle. He'd found instead an opportunity to address it. The question was whether he'd have the courage to follow through. The next 3 weeks were a whirlwind of analysis and soul-searching for Marcus Wellington. He assigned his best financial analyst to review James's proposal, but unusually, he didn't delegate the entire evaluation. Instead, Marcus found himself spending evenings in his study, poring over community development research, microfinance case studies, and economic mobility data. James had cited impressive academic sources, papers from MIT's Poverty Action Lab, case studies from Bangladesh's Grameen Bank, reports from the Community Development Financial Institutions Fund. The more Marcus read, the more he realized how little he'd understood about the financial challenges facing working-class Americans despite decades in finance. His world of high-level investments and corporate strategy had blinded him to grassroots economics. Marcus's CFO, Patricia Chun, delivered her preliminary report over breakfast at his office. "It's unorthodox, but it's not crazy," she said, sliding a bound analysis across his desk. "The financial modeling is surprisingly sophisticated. He's accounted for default rates, economic downturn scenarios, and regulatory changes. The community partnerships are real. I called 10 of the 30 businesses he listed, and they're all legitimately committed. His proposed interest rates are below market, but not unrealistic if we accept a social return on investment alongside financial return." She paused, studying Marcus with curiosity. "Where did you find this, Marcus? This isn't your typical deal flow." Marcus smiled slightly. "A diner in Queens. Sometimes the best opportunities come from unexpected places." But Patricia wasn't finished. "Here's the challenge. This only works if Howard." She used James's last name, not realizing Marcus knew him as James the waiter. "Executes flawlessly. He's got no track record running an investment fund, no team beyond himself, and no margin for error. We'd essentially be funding his on-the-job training. That's high risk." Everything she said was true, yet Marcus found himself defending James. "I started my first fund at 27 with no track record. People took a chance on me." Patricia raised an eyebrow. "You also had an Ivy League MBA, family connections, and startup capital from your father. This young man has student loans and a job at a diner. It's not the same." The observation stung because it was accurate. Marcus's success had been built on advantages James never had. That evening, Marcus did something he hadn't done in years. He went back to Bernie's diner, this time without disguise. He arrived in a suit, having come directly from a board meeting, and the transformation in how he was treated was immediate and telling. The hostess greeted him deferentially. Bernie himself came out from the kitchen to shake his hand, and other diners glanced over curiously, recognizing him from news coverage. James, working the dinner shift, froze when he spotted Marcus, clearly not expecting to see him again, especially not in his true form. Marcus caught his eye and gestured to the same booth where they'd first spoken. James nodded, finishing an order delivery before approaching. "Mr. Wellington," James said, professional but clearly nervous. "I didn't expect to see you again so soon." Marcus gestured to the seat across from him. "Sit. We need to talk." James glanced around nervously. Bernie was watching from the counter, but Marcus waved a hand. "I've already cleared it with your boss. He's a fan of yours, by the way. Says you're the best worker he's had in 20 years. James sat cautiously, his guard up. "Have you made a decision?" Marcus appreciated his directness. "Not yet. But I have questions and I need honest answers. First question, why should I believe you can execute this? You're 26, you've never managed anything larger than a diner section, and you're asking for $250,000. Give me one good reason to trust you with that responsibility." The challenge was deliberate, designed to see how James responded under pressure. The young man took a breath, gathering his thoughts. "You shouldn't trust me based on nothing," he said finally. "But trust isn't nothing. It's built on evidence. Look at what I've done with what I had. I went from a one-bedroom in the Bronx to Columbia. I built partnerships with 30 local businesses while working full-time and attending graduate school. I taught myself financial modeling well enough that your CFO called it surprisingly sophisticated. I don't have a track record managing money, but I have a track record of succeeding despite obstacles. Give me the resources people like you started with, and I'll show you what I can do." It was a compelling argument, framed not as plea but as business proposition. Marcus pulled out his tablet, showing James a document. "This is a proposed term sheet. $250,000 structured as a 5-year loan at 4% interest, plus 15% equity in the cooperative. We'd also provide consulting support for my team, financial, legal, and operational expertise. In exchange, you'd submit to quarterly reviews, maintain specified cash reserves, and agree to strict governance standards. If the pilot succeeds, we consider funding expansion. If it fails, the loan converts to a 10-year repayment plan at 6%. He watched James's face as the young man absorbed the terms. "This is real," James whispered. "You're actually offering this." Marcus nodded. "I'm offering a partnership, not charity. This is still a business deal. Can you accept that?" James read through the terms carefully, his lips moving slightly as he processed the legal language. When he looked up, there were tears in his eyes, but his voice was steady. "There's one change I need. The equity share should be 20%, not 15%. If this succeeds, you should profit proportionally to your risk. I won't build this on unfair terms, even in my favor." The integrity of the counteroffer stunned Marcus. Most people would take the better deal without question, but James wanted fairness, not advantage. "Why would you negotiate against yourself?" Marcus asked. James met his gaze squarely. "Because this can't be about me enriching myself. It has to be about demonstrating a model that others can replicate. If the terms are too favorable to the founder, it won't scale. And because your father apparently taught you about decency, and mine taught me that integrity matters more than profit. We both had good fathers, Mr. Wellington. Let's honor them by doing this right." 6 weeks later, Marcus stood before the assembled business owners and community leaders in a church basement in Queens, watching James present the newly formed Howard Community Investment Cooperative. The room was packed with skeptics and believers, their faces reflecting every shade of doubt and hope. James had transformed in the intervening weeks. He'd left his job at Bernie's to focus full-time on the cooperative, had recruited a board of local business owners, and had refined his pitch into something powerful and precise. Now he stood at a makeshift podium, his voice carrying conviction as he explained how the cooperative would work. Local businesses would invest modest amounts, pooling capital that would then be loaned back to member businesses at fair rates for expansion, equipment, or emergency needs. The beauty of this model, James explained, clicking through a presentation on a borrowed projector, is that it keeps capital circulating locally. When you borrow from a big bank, the interest leaves the community. Here, interest payments get redistributed to other local businesses or reinvested in the community fund. It's a closed loop that builds collective wealth instead of extracting it. Marcus watched the crowd's reaction. Some nodded enthusiastically. Others looked skeptical. An older woman raised her hand. "This sounds good, but how do we know you won't just take our money and disappear? No offense, but you're asking for trust without a track record." It was a fair question, one Marcus had grappled with himself. James nodded, appreciating her directness. "That's why we've structured this with real accountability. The cooperative will be governed by a board of member businesses, not by me alone. All financials will be audited quarterly by an independent firm and made available to all members. And Mr. Wellington's team will provide oversight and financial expertise." He gestured to Marcus, who'd been standing quietly in the back. "He's not just our lead investor, he's our quality control. If I make mistakes, you have someone with 50 years of financial experience to catch them." It was smart, using Marcus's involvement as proof of legitimacy. The crowd's demeanor shifted as they registered the billionaire's presence, but Marcus could see the calculation in their eyes. Why would someone that wealthy care about a small community investment fund? Marcus had agreed to speak, though he rarely addressed groups this small anymore. He stepped forward, feeling strangely nervous. "I'm here because James Howard reminded me of something I'd forgotten," he began. "My father started with nothing, built a fortune, and told me that wealth was a responsibility, not just a privilege. For too long, I've honored his memory with charity, but not with real change. This cooperative is different. It's not a handout. It's an investment in a model that could reshape how communities build economic resilience. I'm not here to be a savior. I'm here to be a partner in something that James designed and that you'll govern. My role is to provide capital and expertise, but the decisions will be yours." The speech was short, but seemed to resonate. Questions followed about default protection, interest rates, loan approval processes, expansion plans. James answered most of them, but occasionally looked to Marcus for support on technical details. They developed a partnership rhythm over the previous weeks, spending hours together modeling scenarios, stress-testing assumptions, and debating strategy. Marcus had come to respect James's intellect and to genuinely enjoy their collaboration. The young man challenged him, pushed back on assumptions, and forced him to think beyond conventional financial wisdom. It reminded Marcus of his early days, when building something meaningful had mattered more than quarterly returns. After 2 hours, 23 businesses signed commitment agreements, pledging seed capital totaling $87,000. Not as much as hoped, but enough for a strong start when combined with Marcus's investment. As people filed out, many stopped to shake James's hand, and several approached Marcus with cautious gratitude. One man, a Puerto Rican bodega owner in his 60s, gripped Marcus's hand firmly. "I lost my first store in 2008, Mr. Wellington. Banks wouldn't give me another chance. This cooperative is giving me that chance. Thank you for believing in us." The raw emotion in his voice struck Marcus deeply. He'd written billion-dollar checks without feeling the impact, but this modest investment had already changed lives. After everyone left, Marcus and James remained, stacking chairs and cleaning up. "That went well," Marcus said. "You were impressive up there." James smiled wearily, the adrenaline clearly wearing off. "I was terrified. Half those people knew my mom, watched me grow up. The pressure to not let them down is crushing." Marcus understood that burden intimately. The weight of other people's hopes had driven many of his best and worst decisions. "Use that pressure," he advised. "Let it make you careful, not paralyzed. And remember, you're not doing this alone anymore." James looked at him with gratitude mixed with something else, perhaps the beginning of genuine friendship. As they loaded the projector into James's beat-up Honda, Marcus made a decision. "I want you to meet someone. My daughter, Sarah." She runs a nonprofit focused on economic empowerment. She's got experience you'll need, and I think you two would work well together." James looked surprised. "You're bringing in your family?" Marcus laughed. "She'll kill me if I do something this interesting without involving her. Besides, she's better at community organizing than anyone I know. You'll need that." The invitation was significant. Marcus rarely mixed his business ventures with his family, but this felt different. This wasn't just business anymore. It was personal in all the best ways. 8 months into the cooperative's operation, Marcus sat in James's modest office, a converted storage room above a laundromat, reviewing the quarterly report. The numbers told a mixed story. 21 loans had been issued totaling $183,000. 18 businesses were current on payments. 2 were in forbearance due to seasonal cash flow issues, and 1 had defaulted completely when the owner's health crisis forced a business closure. The default rate was higher than optimal but within acceptable parameters for a startup fund serving high-risk borrowers. More importantly, the businesses that had received capital were thriving. The bodega owner had expanded his inventory and hired 2 employees. A seamstress had purchased industrial equipment and doubled her capacity. A food truck operator had opened a brick-and-mortar location. But success had brought unexpected challenges. Word had spread about the cooperative, and loan applications now exceeded available capital by a factor of 5. James was working 100-hour weeks, conducting credit assessments, monitoring loans, and managing member relationships while still finishing his master's thesis. The strain was showing. He'd lost weight. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and Marcus had noticed a tremor in his hands during their last meeting. "You're burning out," Marcus said bluntly. "This pace isn't sustainable." James rubbed his eyes, not denying it. "I know. But how do I say no to people who need help? Yesterday, a woman came in crying because she's about to lose her bakery after 30 years. We could save her business with a $20,000 loan, but we don't have the capital." The conversation reminded Marcus of his own early struggles, the impossible choices between growth and sustainability. "You need to hire staff," he said. "I know you're trying to keep overhead low, but you can't scale yourself. What if we increase the investment to fund 2 full-time positions, a credit analyst and an operations manager?" James shook his head stubbornly. "That eats into loan capital. Every dollar spent on salaries is a dollar not helping a business." Marcus recognized the martyrdom complex, had fallen into it himself decades ago. And when you collapse from exhaustion, $0 help anyone. "This is a marathon, James, not a sprint. Let me tell you about my first company." Marcus leaned back, memory pulling him into the past. "I worked 90-hour weeks for 3 years straight, convinced I was indispensable. Then I had a heart attack at 32. Spent a week in the hospital, nearly died, and realized I'd built a company that couldn't function without me, which meant I'd built it wrong. After that, I learned to delegate, to build systems instead of being a hero. You're making the same mistake." The story landed. Marcus could see it in James's expression. "But the people who need help," he started. Marcus cut him off gently. "Will be better served by a sustainable organization than by your sacrifice. Honor your community by building something that lasts beyond you." The advice precipitated a shift. Over the next month, James reluctantly agreed to bring on staff. First Mariana, a credit analyst with 15 years at a commercial bank who'd been laid off and was eager to work in community development. Then Derek, an operations manager with nonprofit experience who brought desperately needed administrative expertise. Marcus watched James struggle with delegation, saw him second-guess decisions and micromanage details. During one particularly tense meeting, Marcus pulled him aside. "You hired these people for their expertise. Trust them to use it. Your job now is strategic leadership, not doing everything yourself." It was hard-won wisdom, painful to learn but essential to internalize. The cooperative's first major crisis came in month 10, when one of the member businesses, a construction company, defaulted on a $40,000 loan after the owner was arrested for insurance fraud unrelated to his business. The default triggered panic among other members who worried about the safety of their investments. An emergency meeting was called, and the church basement filled with angry, frightened business owners demanding answers. "How could you loan money to a criminal?" someone shouted. "Did you do any background checks?" James stood at the front, absorbing the anger with visible pain. Marcus watched from the side, resisting the urge to intervene. This was James's test, his moment to lead through crisis or be consumed by it. "You're right to be angry," James said finally, his voice cutting through the noise. "We should have caught this. Our due diligence process missed red flags that a more thorough background check would have revealed. That's on me, and I take full responsibility." The admission surprised the crowd into silence. "Here's what we're doing to fix it. First, we're implementing enhanced screening protocols, criminal background checks, reference verification, and deeper financial analysis. Second, we're establishing a reserve fund. 3% of all loan interest will go into a pool to cover future defaults. Third, we're being transparent about this failure. The full details will be in next month's member report." It was a masterclass in crisis management. Acknowledge the problem, take responsibility, present solutions, and commit to transparency. Marcus approached him after the meeting, as people filed out still grumbling but mollified. "That was well done," he said. "You turned a mob into a concerned constituency." James looked exhausted but relieved. "I almost lost it. Almost started making excuses." Marcus smiled. "But you didn't. You faced it honestly, and that's what leadership looks like. Every successful venture has moments like this. The question is whether you learn from them or let them break you." That night, over pizza in James's cramped office, they revised the cooperative's policies, building in safeguards and accountability measures. Marcus realized he was enjoying this, the hands-on problem-solving, the tangible impact, the sense that his experience was being used to build rather than just to profit. 2 years after that initial encounter at Bernie's Diner, Marcus stood beside James at a press conference announcing the cooperative's expansion to 3 additional New York boroughs. The statistics told an impressive story: $1.2 million in loans issued, 47 businesses funded, 103 jobs created, and a default rate of just 4.3%, well below industry averages for similar lending. Major foundations had taken notice, and the Ford Foundation had just committed $2 million to replicate the model in 10 cities nationwide. James, now 28, had completed his master's degree while running the cooperative and had been featured in Forbes's 30 Under 30 list for social entrepreneurship. But Marcus was proudest of something the statistics didn't capture: the transformation he'd witnessed in both James and himself. The young man standing beside him bore little resemblance to the exhausted waiter from Bernie's. James had grown into his leadership, had learned to delegate, to trust his team, and to balance ambition with sustainability. He'd also maintained his integrity, refusing several offers from venture capitalists who wanted to commercialize the model in ways that would have compromised its community-centered mission. "This only works if the community controls it," he'd told Marcus after turning down a $10 million investment offer. "The moment we prioritize returns over people, we become exactly what we're fighting against." Marcus had supported the decision, recognizing the wisdom in it even as his business instincts questioned leaving money on the table. But James wasn't the only one transformed. Marcus's involvement with the cooperative had awakened something dormant in him, a sense of purpose beyond wealth accumulation. He'd started attending meetings in person rather than just reviewing reports, had gotten to know the member businesses and their owners, had celebrated their successes, and supported them through struggles. His daughter Sarah had indeed joined the effort, bringing her nonprofit expertise and quickly becoming James's closest advisor. Watching the two of them strategize together, Marcus felt a pride different from anything his business achievements had generated. This was legacy in its truest form. Not his name on buildings, but his impact rippling through communities. At the press conference, a reporter asked James about his relationship with Marcus Wellington. How did a billionaire come to fund a community investment cooperative? James smiled, glancing at Marcus. He came into a diner in Queens 2 years ago, disguised in old clothes, trying to understand how ordinary people lived. I recognized him and handed him a note asking for help. He could have ignored me, but he didn't. He gave me something more valuable than money. He gave me respect, partnership, and the chance to prove what I could do. Mr. Wellington taught me about business, but I like to think I reminded him about purpose. We've been teaching each other ever since. The answer was generous, more generous than Marcus deserved, but it captured the essence of their partnership. Marcus took the microphone next, emotion tightening his throat. 2 years ago, I walked into Bernie's diner thinking I was doing research, trying to understand a world I'd lost touch with. What I found was a young man with a brilliant idea and the courage to take a ridiculous risk approaching a billionaire stranger. James reminded me that wealth without purpose is just numbers in an account. My father used to say that money is like water. It can nourish or it can drown, depending on how you direct it. This cooperative is about directing it toward nourishment, toward building rather than extracting. I'm grateful to James for giving me the chance to be part of something meaningful. After the press conference, Marcus and James walked through the Queens neighborhood where it had all begun. Bernie's diner was still there, thriving as always, and they stopped in for lunch, sitting in that same booth where James had handed him the note that changed both their lives. Bernie himself brought their burgers, grinning. "Look at you two, famous now. But you still come back for my burgers." Marcus took a bite, savoring the familiar taste. "Best burgers in New York, Bernie." Some things shouldn't change. But so much had changed. The cooperative had become a model studied by economists and community organizers. James was being courted by political campaigns and policy institutes. And Marcus had redirected a significant portion of his wealth toward community development, establishing a foundation focused on economic mobility. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't recognized you?" James asked, stirring his Coke with a straw. Marcus considered the question seriously. "I think you would have found another way. You're too determined to be stopped by one missed opportunity. But I'm grateful it was me. This has given my wealth meaning it never had before." James nodded, then pulled out his phone, showing Marcus a photo. "Remember Manuel? The bodega owner who lost his first store in 2008. Marcus nodded. "He just opened his third location last week. Hired his grandson as a manager. That's 15 jobs in a neighborhood where jobs are scarce. That's what we built, Mr. Wellington. Not just loans, but futures." The impact went beyond statistics and expansion plans. Marcus had started mentoring other young entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds, had revised his company's investment criteria to include social impact metrics, and had become an advocate for policy. Changes in community lending regulations. His transformation hadn't gone unnoticed. Business journals had covered his shift, some praising his philanthropy, others cynically questioning his motives. Marcus didn't care about the commentary. He knew the truth. A young waiter with more courage than sense had handed him a note that awakened his conscience and gave his wealth purpose. Everything that followed, the cooperative's success, the national expansion, the lives changed, flowed from that single moment of audacity. "I've been thinking about something," James said as they finished their meal. "I want to establish a scholarship fund for the children of cooperative members, help them get the education I had to fight so hard for. But I don't want to fund it with cooperative money. I want to build it separately, something sustainable. Would you help me design it?" Marcus smiled, recognizing the pattern. James forever thinking about the next challenge, the next community need to address. "Of course. But on one condition. You name it after your father. Martin Howard deserved better than what the system gave him. Let's make sure his grandchildren's generation gets those chances." James's eyes glistened with tears. "He would have liked you, Mr. Wellington. He always said the difference between good and bad rich people was whether they remembered being human." As they left the diner, Marcus looked back at the booth where everything had changed. A young couple sat there now, laughing over their meal, oblivious to the history that location held. That seemed right, somehow. Life continuing, communities thriving, people building futures. Marcus's father had been right about wealth being a responsibility. It had taken a burger, a waiter, and a shocking note to make him truly understand. His legacy wouldn't be measured in billions, but in Manuel's opening stores, in families keeping homes, in communities building sustainable wealth. And it had all started because he'd been willing to listen when someone unexpected asked for his help. "Thank you," Marcus said to James as they stood on the sidewalk. "For being brave enough to approach me, for pushing me to be better, for giving my success meaning." James shook his head, then pulled Marcus into an embrace that transcended their different backgrounds and ages. "Thank you for seeing me as a partner, not a charity case. For believing in the idea before it was proven. For being the kind of rich person my dad hoped existed, but never got to meet." They stood there on that Queen Street corner, an unlikely partnership forged in a diner booth, united by a shared belief that wealth should build communities, not just bank accounts. The note that started it all was framed in James's office now, a reminder of the power of audacity, the importance of listening, and the transformation possible when people bridge divides with respect and purpose.